appreciate you. No worries. I'll try and talk fast. Good to see everybody this morning. Oh, the mic's on. Good, excellent. It's great to be back here in Campbell, Missouri. I've spent some good times in this part of the country with their family, roughing it a little bit. I do enjoy roughing it. When you're in the military, you tend to spend a lot of time in the field, and some people like being in the field, and some people don't like being in the field. And it's uncomfortable and primitive, and I enjoyed it a lot. It's great, fantastic. So that's bode well for me in many different situations throughout my experience, throughout my life. I appreciate the introduction from Pastor. The main reason that I won't complain about the things that we've given up in order to serve the Lord is that, like Paul said, I count them but dung. To be honest, if we have the right perspective, whatever we don't have because we're serving God is not anything compared to the privilege that it is to do anything for the Lord, right? And I'm going to talk about that a little bit today. It's a little bit on my heart in the message that I want to bring. But who are we that God would see fit to use us to do any work for Him? We should only be so blessed as to lose everything to serve the Lord. And we're going to talk about that today. Turn with me to the book of Matthew. We're going to start and read a few verses here through the New Testament, but we're going to start reading Matthew 16. And while you guys are turning there, I just want to do just a really micro update, Operation Mordecai. Over the last year since I was here, we've been able to venture into missions overseas. The security ministry that we do is it's a real big part of our ministry as it's turned out. My wife is excellent at teaching women self-defense, and the Lord's blessed that part of the ministry. We've been able to train together churches all across the entire country, from Los Angeles to New Jersey and many places in between, and that's been a huge blessing. But the biggest focus we have with Operation Mordecai isn't necessarily the security part of the security ministry. If I'm honest with you, it's the war-fighting part of the ministry. And the reason we teach physical security is because part of the spiritual war that we fight manifests itself in physical violence. And churches are susceptible to that, especially as we move into a darker and darker age with our society. And that's a necessary step that we need to be, being wise as serpents, but harmless as doves. We need to have a correct understanding of what security looks like from a biblical perspective. And one of the biggest things we have to keep in mind there is that we're not fighting a physical war. And we're not waiting for a physical war to come to our shores. The spiritual war is here and has always been here. And that is not only a war, it is the overwhelming cause of all of the violence, the wars, the corruption, the societal degradation that we see. You can tie it all back to that, spiritual warfare. A lot of times we think of that, we just slip into this mindset of placing it as figurative war, right? Spiritual things, a lot of times, because we can't see them, just in our mind, they often become figurative, right? Hypothetical. But it's not that. The spiritual drives the physical in every sense. We are spiritual beings inhabiting a physical body, right? We have a soul that's eternal. And once this body is worn out and this flesh is cast off, that soul is going to spend an eternity somewhere, right? Our job here is to fight this war to make sure that it goes to the right place. And that's important. The war-fighting piece of Operation Mordecai is what we're passionate about. And one of the greatest things we want to do is see the gospel get into places where it's not currently going. Remote, arduous conditions, closed and restricted access places that require a little more security, places that are hard to get to. So the Lord's opened the door for us over this last year to take a couple of trips into Sierra Leone, which has been fantastic. That's a very primitive nation, I would say, very undeveloped. The majority of the work that we've done has been in the bush country in south central Sierra Leone. And many of these villages that we've gone to, you just can't get to them without throwing a rucksack on and walking down a foot trail to a village that may or may not have ever seen. Many of the villages we went to have never had a missionary visit them, have never had a missionary walk through. They've never seen a white person in their life. Not that missionaries have to be white people, but a Western missionary has never breached their borders and walked into their town. And that's a sad thing. We've been able to do that a couple of different times. The Lord's blessed greatly. The one thing I will say about that before I get into the message is the people there in Sierra Leone are extremely open to the gospel, incredibly hungry for the gospel. You'll open up this book, and in a majority Muslim country, about 85% Muslim traditionally, it's actually waning now because the power of the gospel is, I want to say, sweeping that country. But it's causing effect. If we can put missionaries on the field there, there's going to be great fruit there. I think they actually are maybe, I've never seen this before, but I believe that maybe they're on the verge of a national revival. I think that could happen. The opponents to that are a couple of things. First of all, their horrific economy. Their inflation has doubled since I was there in September last. I was there again in January. Since I was there, their inflation has doubled. It's crippled their economy. Most people don't have sufficient food that live in the country. Talk about enduring hardness. I have a good friend, pastor there now, Pastor Van Boy, who lives in Moyamba Junction. I was on the phone with him just the other day. I said, Pastor, you guys have enough food? He's like, no. But that's normal for them. They've come to accept that they don't have enough food. If they get to eat once a day, it's a great thing. We'll talk about that a little bit today. But one of the things I've seen going through the bush is the Methodist Church. You were talking about the Methodist Church. The Methodist Church seems to have a bit of a presence there, United Methodist Church. And the sad part of it is almost all of the Methodist Church doctrine is teaching a salvation by works, loving people, being good, community action, and that's permeated through Sierra Leone. And so it's been a blessing actually to go, and as we travel through the bush, to be able to sit pastors down, open the Bible up, show them from the Scripture what true salvation is, and just see the acceptance when that's outlined to them clearly in black and white and red. The acceptance that a lot of them have for that is a really beautiful thing to see. All right, let's get into this. I want to talk about today, last time I was here, I talked about the war that's around us. I spent a lot of time on that. I talked about a couple things the church needs to do. We need to enlist. We need to engage. Today I want to dive into one of those aspects a little bit more. And that is, what if we became a disciple of Jesus Christ? What does that look like? And I pose that as a question, and we're going to see why here in a moment. Let's go to Matthew 16. We're going to read 24 to 28 here. Verse 24 says, Then said Jesus unto his disciples, If any man will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whosoever will save his life shall lose it, and whosoever will lose his life for my sake shall find it. For what does it profit a man if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul? Or what shall a man give in exchange for his soul? For the Son of Man shall come in the glory of his Father with his angels, and they shall reward every man according to his works. Verily I say unto you, there shall be some standing here which shall not taste death till they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Flip a few more pages over. Let's go to the book of Mark chapter 8. And we're going to read a couple more here in the New Testament. In Mark 8, we're going to read just verse 34. It says, And when he had called the people unto him with his disciples also, he said unto them, Whosoever will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whosoever will save his life shall lose it, but whosoever shall lose his life for my sake, the same, and the gospel's, the same shall save it. Again, we're going to flip over quickly to Luke chapter 9. And Luke 9:23. You're seeing a pattern here. And he said unto them, If any man will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. 24 says, For whosoever shall save his life shall lose it, but whosoever will lose his life for my sake, the same shall find it. And then finally, we're going to pause for a moment in Luke chapter 14, looking at 25 to 33. Starting at 25. Here we go. And there went great multitudes with him, and he turned and said unto them, If any man come to me, and hate not his father and mother and wife and children and brethren and sisters, yea, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. And whosoever doth not bear his cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. For which of you intending to build a tower sitteth not down first, and counteth the cost, whether he have sufficient to finish it? Lest haply after he hath laid the foundation is not able to finish it, all that behold it begin to mock him, saying, This man began to build and was not able to finish. Or what king going to make war against another king sitteth not down first, and consulteth whether he be able with 10,000 to meet him that cometh against him with 20,000? Or else, while the other is yet a great way off, he sendeth an ambassage, and desireth conditions of peace. So likewise, whosoever he be of you that forsaketh not all that he hath, he cannot be my disciple. We are seeing a formula here, aren't we? Some repetition, right? And it's repeated several times, almost verbatim, almost the same thing recorded. And so we can ask ourselves, well, was this an incident that each one of these Gospels recorded? Or did each one of these Gospels record a different incident because the wording is slightly different in each one? It doesn't matter too much, to be honest with you. It's recorded several times here for a reason, right? We've got a formula outlined to us, and there's something important about that we're going to dig into it. And the formula is laying out what it means to be a disciple. What is it going to take? It's outlining a description of a career path, if you will, a job description. This is what it's going to take. And I want to start really early on in that description because the formula goes like this. If any man, right, will come after me, let him deny himself, let him take up his cross and follow me. There we got 4 things. Let's dig into all of them. The first one is if. And I go to that first one is if because that's a big if. Now we're not talking about salvation. Salvation doesn't have a list of requirements from us, does it? There's not anything that we add to salvation that makes us worthy of having it. Amen. We're not worthy of anything. We've sinned against a holy God that created us. Our sin, like Pastor was saying earlier, our sin, no matter what it is, makes us stand before Him as guilty and separated from Him. And so it's not salvation. It's a decision to put everything in to following Him, to working for God, right? A disciple, especially back in the Bible times, was somebody who essentially forsook his life and followed that person that he was a disciple of, the teacher, right? And everything about their lives would surround that person. It was a cultural thing that we don't do anymore, right? We have apprenticeships and things like that, but a discipleship thing, especially historically, they would walk away from everything and follow that. And that's what the disciples did with Jesus. Jesus said, come after me. And guess what they did? They left all their stuff and they followed after Him. The other reason I know that it's not talking about salvation is that it's a choice. In Romans 12:1, Paul says, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies. Now he's talking to the brethren, right? We're going to go into that verse for a minute, but he's talking to the brethren there. And so that's the delineation I want to make. But it's a big question. And the reason it's a big question is because it costs a lot, right? It costs a lot. And the choice we have to make is a little bit of a scary one, right? And I'm not going to get ahead of myself, but it's a little bit of a scary choice. The second thing we see here, and we're going to dig into this for a little while, is to deny yourself. Now, what I think really denying yourself kind of pertains to, after studying this, I think it's really just a transfer of ownership, to be honest with you, right? It's you're transferring ownership of what you own because you do. You own this. You were given free will to choose things, right? So you own this. This is yours. And we value this a lot, right? We value our flesh. We value our lives. We value our safety and security. We value our comfort. We value our careers and our homes. Like, we value what we have, don't we? In fact, we cling to it desperately often. We point often at people who are very rich in this world, right? The Bible talks about that. And we say, well, they are maybe more keen to those physical things, right? Maybe they're clinging more to the status of this life, to their riches, to their wealth, to their comfort. And so we point at them like they're clinging to this stuff. But what we don't often realize is sometimes it's the poorest people who desperately covet the things of this life more, right? Who don't have it. We can be obsessed by our lack of temporal things, right? We can be obsessed by our lack of income, by our lack of housing, by our lack of food, by our lack of, you name it, that can consume us just as much. And we can hold that just as dear as those who have plenty and to spare, right? And in America, we have plenty. The poorest among us is infinitely better off than the majority of the world, right? We're extremely blessed, and we hold this emotionally pretty tight to our chest, right? I dare say we plan a big chunk of our lives around these things, right? And denying yourself, I don't think it means intentionally just getting rid of everything because it's there and we're just going to deny ourselves, so we're just going to get rid of everything that God gave us. No, we're supposed to be stewards of the things that God's given us. But denying ourselves is simply transferring ownership. There's a really good example of this in 2 Corinthians. I'm going to read really quick for you guys. For the sake of time, I'm just going to flip there and read it. 2 Corinthians 8, 1 through 5. Moreover, brethren, we do you to wit of the grace of God bestowed on the churches of Macedonia, how that in great trial of affliction, the abundance of their joy and their deep poverty abounded unto the riches of their liberality. For to their power I bear record, yea, and beyond their power they were willing of themselves, praying us with much entreaty that we would receive the gift and take upon us the fellowship of the ministry of the saints. And this they did, not as we hoped, but first gave their own selves to the Lord, and unto us by the will of God. So we're looking at an impoverished, embattled group of people who didn't have anything already. But beyond their own power to give, they did so. In fact, they were entreating Paul. They're begging Paul, hey, we can't afford this, but please take it. Like, this is more than we can give. We understand that, but please take it. Why? Because first they, gave themselves. They transferred ownership. So that's the first thing we transfer ownership of, is ourselves. Transfer ownership of ourselves. My favorite passage to talk about this of all time, Romans 12, 1 and 2. The Lord used this greatly in my life in the past years. It says, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. Right? Be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what's that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. Digging into that a little bit, we often look at serving the Lord as a surrender thing, right? We're looking for a calling that we then can surrender to. And that's a little bit of a cultural thing that we've done, right? In a lot of senses, we've kind of relegated that to the few people who've been handpicked and hand-chosen to serve God. And we really wait for God to be like, well, you're going to go to Africa. And then we say, okay, I've surrendered to God to go to Africa, right? And it may very well be that God calls someone to Africa. That's a good thing. And in fact, when God calls somebody to the mission field or calls somebody to the ministry, it's usually a good sign that they've already done what this verse is talking about. And that is present yourself. Present yourself as a sacrifice. See, when the Lord got a hold of us, Pastor said we left a lucrative career. We actually left about 3 or 4 relatively successful streams of income that were taking so much time that God finally got to my thick head, and I realized that I was wasting what little time I had on this planet. That I was wasting it. Now, we were a good Christian family on the outside. We were in church on Sundays and Thursday nights, not Wednesdays, but maybe a little bit less spiritual Thursday nights, but anyway. We looked right on the outside. We were where we were supposed to be, but we made our decisions based on our bank accounts and not based on our Bibles, right? Not based on our values. Those things drove us. And so it wasn't until the Lord brought me to a place through sheer frustration because of my thick-headed stubbornness that I finally pleaded with him to take everything away. I brought myself to God and said, I'm extremely tired of me. I've caused myself nothing but heartache and trouble. And while it looks successful on the outside and while my family's living well, it's a waste of my time. It's a waste of my life. It's a waste of my family's life. It's not a good example to leave behind to my children who are growing. So I said, please take this, right? That's what presenting yourself means. I like to make the analogy of enlisting in military service, and I talked about that last time I was here. When you enlist in the military, guess what you do? I'm here. I want to serve. This is worth everything that I am. It's worth it to do this. Would you please accept me? I'll go through a rigorous testing and training to be able to achieve this place of serving, right? That's what we should do for God. Whether we're, a missionary, a pastor, a full-time evangelist, in the ministry, we like to call it, right? Full-time. Whether we're that person or not, we've relegated this mindset to those people that we've established that level of servitude to. But that's not what this says. Brethren, I beseech you that you present your bodies as a living sacrifice. I'm dead. I'm nothing. And nothing that I have any longer belongs to me. I would be only so fortunate to work for God. And whether that means my life changes and turns upside down, right, and I'm incredibly unsettled and I end up going to foreign fields and spending my life in the dirt trying to tell people about Jesus, or whether I still live in Campbell, Missouri, and I have a job and I serve my family. The outcome isn't the process. That makes sense? It's not where you end up, it's where you start. God's in charge of where we end up. The one thing we do is we just transfer ownership. We present ourselves. Ourselves first. You got to start there. It's reasonable service. It's not for the select few. And we need to renew ourselves by the renewing of our minds, transform ourselves by the renewing of our minds. When we look at this in that aspect, this word is what transforms our minds. This is what renews our minds, right? We look at this, we go back to this and be like, look, I'm putting too much emphasis on Monday through Friday and not enough emphasis on eternity. Because that's a really short time in comparison, isn't it? Don't be conformed to this world. This is a big one we often miss, I think, because Christians, we think that if we look like this, right, that's not conforming to this world. And if we're here today, then we've not conformed to this world, right? But when we live our lives based on our occupations, and we make our identities, and this is especially true for us men, when we make our identities based upon our occupations. If I ask a lot of men, if I ask, what do you do? Their occupation comes up, because that's in their minds, that's what they are, that's what they do, especially in a lot of career fields that are, careers that maybe you have to pursue and sacrifice things to pursue, right? A lot of times that becomes our identity, but that's not it. That's conforming to this world. It is. It's living our lives the way that the unsaved live their lives. It's making our decisions based upon our budgets, not based upon our Bibles, right? And the world does that. That's confirmation. That's conforming to the world. Let's not do that, right? We've got to present ourselves. It's got to not be any of ours and all of His. And the last part of that verse says that you can prove that perfect and acceptable will of God. Now here's the thing. I'm not receiving any orders from the United States military. I'm not waiting for a letter to come in the mail, and I'm not waiting for a phone call that says, Sergeant Cole, report to this base for duty at this time. I'm not going to get that. Do you know why? Because I'm not enlisted. I'm no longer in the military. They don't have any control of my life anymore. That time in my life when I submitted myself to the military and served the country, and put myself in a place where I was willing to give my life in support of our nation, I'm not there anymore, right? I left that. That's what the military is. It's just temporal. But that's often why we're not hearing from God too, right? Well, I just haven't been called. Are you available to call, right? Maybe the reason you haven't got any marching orders from God is because the very beginning of this is that you haven't presented yourself as a sacrifice. You haven't, not in this sense of, you know what, I got all this going on over here, but Lord, guess what? If you need me, I'll go help you out. If you need me, let me know, and I'll help you. That's the wrong mindset to have. Who are we that God would be like, oh, I really need somebody right now over in Cameroon. I desperately need someone in Cameroon. I'm going to go and look around and see if I can't find somebody that's going to work for me. I don't think that's how it goes. I think God says, look at this servant. He's presented himself to me. I'm the only thing that's important in his life. I'm going to pull him out, and I'm going to send him over here. Or I'm going to pull him out, and I'm going to send him to Campbell, Missouri. Right? The destination isn't the point. It's the beginning. It's where you start from. The second thing, transferring ownership of possessions. Isn't that the same thing as yours? No, I don't think it's the same thing as yourself. Right? I think you have to transfer ownership of yourself first, but I think then you have to transfer ownership of your possessions, because we possess things. Sometimes we hold them pretty tight to our chest. And we can say that all this stuff's not ours. We say that often. It's all God's stuff anyway. Wreck your truck. See how you feel about that, right? How much God's stuff is it now, right? We have some pretty emotional attachments to stuff that we have to constantly keep track of. We struggled with having a really bad truck and a really bad RV for a while. And now the Lord's blessed us with a truck that runs well and a good RV that's going to work for us. And you know what I can get attached to? Pretty easily. A good working truck and a good stable RV that's going to work for us. I can get attached to that pretty easily, can't I? We look at the early church. I'm not going to go there right now, but if you look in the beginning of the book of Acts, you look at the early church. Look at what they did because the mission was so important, because the work was so worth it. Anyone who had property, anyone who had possessions, anyone who had stuff, they went and sold it, right? And they brought that money to the church. Not because they wanted to live in communism. I've heard that before. Whoa, see, that shows communism. No, it's not. It wasn't communism. That wasn't compelled giving. That was true giving. You know, we tithe 10%, right? And we have that standard based in the Old Testament. But you want to know what the example we have in the New Testament? It wasn't 10%. The first example we have of giving in the church was people who sold everything they had in this world. And they brought that to the church. Why would they do that? Because the church exists for one purpose, and that's to spread the gospel of Jesus Christ. That's to spread that word to this entire world. Amen. And that mission was worth it for them to give absolutely everything they had to that mission. All of their possessions. We got to be careful that we don't get too possessive of our things. And that's something we constantly have to reassess. Amen. Expectations. I'm going to read this one, Matthew 16:22. We already looked at Matthew 16, but let's look at Matthew 16:22 here. Jesus has just asked his disciples, who do men say that I am? And his disciples gave him some answers. Well, some say this, some say that. And who do you say that I am? The disciples said, Peter says, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. I know who you are. You are the Messiah. You're the Christ. Peter understood that. Now let's keep that in mind because that's important. And then immediately after that, Jesus begins telling them what? That he's going to die. Jesus begins telling the disciples that he's going to die. Peter's reaction was a little strong. Verse 22, then Peter took him and began to rebuke him, saying, be it far from thee, Lord, this shall not be unto thee. And Jesus slaps him in the face a little bit, says, get behind me, Satan. Right? Now, that whole engagement's a little bit strange until we kind of break it down and understand what's going on here. There was a great subsection of Israel, indeed probably most of the Jews, were looking for a Messiah. Peter had found the Messiah, right? And he was excited about this. He'd found the guy. But the reason they were looking for a Messiah, because the Messiah was going to restore the kingdom to Israel. Right? The Messiah was going to rule and reign forever. And they assumed that meant right now. So Peter was probably, just like many other people in that time, was probably expecting Jesus to come, set up his kingdom, kick out the Romans, and then that glorious reign would begin right there. He had an expectation problem. Right? He was expecting one thing, and God was going to do something entirely different. And a lot of times, our expectations hang us up too. Right? Peter's expectation was so strong. Now, Peter had given his entire life to serve God. He was literally serving God. He was bringing God lunch. Right? That's how much he was serving God. But his expectation being broken was so strong that he took Jesus, he took God, and said, no, you're not. He took him. He's grabbing it. He's shaking the Son of God, saying, no, you're not. Nuh-uh. That's not how it goes. That expectation. We have expectations that we probably don't even know we have. Societal expectations, honestly, just because of where we live. It's wild to us that my buddy in Sierra Leone doesn't have enough food to eat. When's the last time we didn't have enough food to eat? That's not our problem in America, by the way. Having enough food to eat, we got it. Check. Yeah, got it. Food. It's there, right? We grow it, we shoot it, we buy it from the store. There's plenty of it. We have more problems with having too much food to eat than having not enough, right? We expect to have 3 meals a day, right? We expect to live in a house. Think about that one for a minute. We expect to live in a house, right? A dwelling, an acceptable dwelling. That's an expectation we have. And we have that expectation because it's readily available in our society. But what happens if you lose your house tomorrow? Right? I can say that. I've lost a house before. I've bought a house and then lost it. It's not fun. It's not a fun thing to have to lose, but we have an expectation of that, right? We have an expectation to have an income through a job. It's readily available to us in our society. In fact, it's almost like there's more jobs out there now than there have been. They just don't pay enough to live off of. Almost like nobody wants to work. Right? We have an expectation to be able to create an income through work. If that expectation goes away, we're pretty desperate, aren't we? Probably in a room this size, plenty of people have lost a job before. I know I've lost a job before. It brings on some anxiety, right? We have an expectation about that. We have expectations like we get to rest when we're tired. That's an expectation, right? We get cranky when we don't get to eat or don't get to rest because our expectations haven't been met. We have an expectation for safety. We do. We have an expectation to be safe. And that's not a guarantee. And it's not a guarantee in this building either, right? It's not a guarantee in church to be safe. And we saw this a couple of years ago when all of a sudden it became dangerous to gather together. And we realized that every church across the entire nation had an expectation of being safe. And when that expectation was compromised, what happened to most of us? Right? Most of us chose to cling to our safety, right, rather than stay in the church. And many churches folded. A lot of them did. Many churches now, 3 years later, are still struggling to recover from some of that. Right? I know several churches who are struggling to recover from some of it. I know some churches who are recovering well. I know some who are really struggling to recover. Our expectations didn't get met. Sometimes we hold on those expectations pretty tightly. And we need to identify that because our expectation ought to be that we can serve God. Right? That's the only expectation we should hold. That's the only expectation worth having. And whatever else we have to suffer along the way, if we're doing it for the Lord, it's the only thing that's going to matter 60, 70, 80 years from now. When we pass on, the only thing that's going to matter is what we did for Him. All right, I got to hurry up. Let's talk about a couple more things quickly. I just want to cover them. Take up the cross. Deny yourself, take up the cross. That's counting the cost. It's making a reckoning. Understanding what is this going to cost me, right? In America, it doesn't typically cost us very much. The price is pretty cheap here, right? You can serve God without losing a whole lot. Honestly, we lost a lot when we got into the ministry. We gave up a lot, but not that much because we were still eating. We were still safe, right? And everything that we lost, we were praise the Lord for because we got to serve Him. Amen. And the life has been so much sweeter serving God than it ever was being comfortable. We got to count the cost of what it's going to take. See, it's not acting in faith when we see the outcome. Counting the cost is being able to accept the outcome, whatever it may be, but acting and doing the thing in faith. Faith is something we can't see. Oftentimes, we act in strategy, and we call that faith, right? And there's nothing wrong with a good strategy. I'm all about a good strategy. Figure out how to get things done. But too often, not having a strategy keeps us from doing what God wants us to do because strategy and faith aren't the same thing. It's easy to count the cost if the cost isn't that high, right? We don't expect a lot of things to cost us maybe our life. We don't expect a lot of, we can serve God a lot without expecting that to cost us our life. But that's what we ought to be willing to give. That's what taking up that cross is. What did Christ do on that cross? He gave himself. He died. And not only, we focus a lot on the physical death, the crucifixion, right? Not only did he die a horrible, painful death, but moreover, God turned his back on him. And he took upon his shoulders the sins of the entire world, which is so much more grievous than whatever physical suffering he had on that death. That's what taking up the cross was for him. Taking up the cross for us ought to be whatever it takes, no matter the cost. It doesn't matter what it is. There's not enough, we can't lose enough to make it not worth serving God. Not enough of us exists on this planet to make it not worth serving God. What little we have here is so incompatible with the glory of doing anything for the Lord. Even if it was one thing your whole life, that's worth it. And I know this firsthand. I'll get to that in a second. 3 Jewish men in Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, what'd they say? But if not, we're not going to bow down to you. Right? They said, our God can save us. Our God's more powerful than you. Our God can keep us out of trouble. But if not, then we're going to go in the fire. And they went in the fire. Happy ending, by the way. Right? There's 4 guys walking around. One of them looks like the Son of God. Happy ending there. How about like Stephen? You know what I mean? What about stories like that? Was that a less happy ending? They did the right thing. They spoke out for the Lord. They stood firm. And they were killed for it. Is that a less happy ending? I don't think so. I don't think that's any less of a happy ending. Amen. Do you know what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had to do? They had to live the rest of their lives out serving God in this world, which that's glorious. But Paul said, for me to die is, right? I don't think that's any less of a good thing. In September, maybe some of you guys know this, there was a young man that went on a mission trip with us to Sierra Leone. His 19-year-old kid named Elijah Beatty. And when Elijah's older brother dropped him off at the airport, he said, man, I know what you're getting into. This is real stuff. Like, this is for real. That's a dangerous place. There's disease, there's sickness, there's danger there. You could die, man. Like, you could die here. You realize that? And Elijah told his brother, and this came out later on, but Elijah told his brother, hey, it doesn't matter. It's worth it. Right? He said, it's worth it. Knowing that should he die because of a missions trip serving God, should he die because of a 2-week trip into the jungle, into the bush, that was worth doing that 2-week trip for. And he did. 2 weeks after we got back to the United States, Elijah Beatty succumbed to a rare form of malaria, as best we can tell. And the Lord took him home. Even if it was just that one time that he got to serve God. That wasn't his first mission trip. He'd been on a couple of mission trips. It didn't make sense to us. The young man was fired up about the Lord. He was fired up about missions. He was heading towards a life of missions work around the world. And the Lord took him home from that one trip. It didn't make sense to us. Even if it was only one thing that we did for God. It's so worth being able to do that one thing. This life isn't important enough for us to hold on to in exchange for serving the Lord. The New Testament says at the end of all of these, if any man will come after me, let him deny himself, let him take up his cross, let him follow me. At the end of that, every time he said, whoever will save his life is going to lose it. Amen. Whoever would lose his life for my sake, he'll find it. The last part of here is following him, right? I'll go into this quickly, and I'll just say this about that. Following him, I think that means not living our faith like it's the foundation of our life. That sounds strange. Our faith shouldn't be the foundation of our life. It should be our whole life. All of it. Right? It's not that we have a faith, we have salvation, God has saved us, and we go to church joyfully, and we run the bus routes joyfully, and we tell people about him joyfully, and the foundation of our life is our faith, and then we have the rest of our life over here, and this much we give to God, and this much is ours. A little unbalanced. I think all of this, our entire existence on this planet, now that we've come to Him, should be His. Amen. No longer ours. Yes. Well, we have the opportunity to choose that. Right? That's not compulsory. Jesus said, if any man will come after me. Amen. So that's a choice we all have to make. And I dare say it's not a choice you make one time. I don't think it's just a choice. You're like, okay, yeah, good. I'm going to do that. Yep, good. I think you get on your face and you bring yourself to God. And you plead with Him and say, you're the only thing that's worth anything in this world. Take me too. Pastor, you come.